Janice Parks froze as her husband's phone lit up on the kitchen counter, Trent's phone buzzing with an unknown number. She shouldn't have answered, but she did. A woman's voice slid through the speaker, calm, intimate, almost amused. "You're in my house now," she said. Janice's breath caught. The voice continued colder this time. "I'm Victoria Hale, Trent's first wife, the one who's supposed to be dead." Janice's knees weakened as silence pressed in like a weight. Then came the final blow. "I've been watching you for 2 years, Janice." And somehow, she already knew things no stranger should ever know. If you were Janice, would you hang up and ignore it? Or start digging for the truth even if it destroys everything you believe? Drop your thoughts below. I want to know what you would do in her place. The silence in the kitchen didn't feel empty anymore. It felt watched. Janice Parks stood frozen with Trent's phone still pressed against her ear even after the call had ended. The dial tone had long faded, but Victoria Hale's voice lingered like a stain she couldn't wash out of her mind. "I've been watching you for 2 years. That wasn't a prank. It didn't sound like a scam. It sounded like someone who had waited patiently." Slowly, Janice lowered the phone. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass of the kitchen window, pale, tense, unfamiliar. Outside, the wealthy suburban street of Westbridge Hills looked perfectly normal. Manicured lawns, quiet houses, a world that pretended nothing ever went wrong behind closed doors. But something had just cracked inside hers. Trent arrived home 40 minutes later. He looked like he always did, perfectly composed, tailored navy suit, loosened tie, calm eyes that softened the moment they saw her. "Hey," he said gently, like nothing in the world could possibly be wrong in his orbit. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Janice almost laughed at the irony. "I got a call," she said carefully, "from your phone." That was the first time Trent paused. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, just a flicker in his expression, like a glitch in something otherwise flawlessly programmed. Then it was gone. "What kind of call?" he asked, setting his briefcase down. Janice studied him. She had always trusted his calmness. It made her feel safe. Tonight it felt rehearsed. "A woman," she said. She said her name was Victoria Hale. The air shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but Janice felt it like pressure changing before a storm. Trent let out a soft breath and walked toward her. "Janice," he said, almost smiling, "Victoria Hale died 5 years ago. Car accident. You probably got some scam call spoofing my number." He reached for her hands. She hesitated before letting him hold them. "You're safe," he added. "Okay. Don't let your mind spiral." That phrase, "don't let your mind spiral," should have comforted her. Instead, it echoed strangely in her chest. Because Victoria hadn't sounded like a scam, she had sounded like someone who knew the inside of Janice's life, the way she paused before saying Janice's name, the precision, the intimacy, and worse, the certainty. That night, Trent made dinner reservations like nothing happened. He kissed her forehead before they left, joked about work stress, asked about her day. He was flawless again, too flawless. And Janice smiled when she was supposed to. But inside, something had already started breaking open. The next morning, Janice woke before him. Trent was still asleep beside her, one arm loosely around her waist. He looked peaceful, almost too peaceful, like someone who had nothing to hide because everything hidden was already under control. Carefully, she slid out of bed and grabbed his phone from the nightstand. It was unlocked. That alone made her stomach tighten. Trent was careful with everything password systems security. He didn't leave things open, unless he didn't need to. She opened his recent calls. Nothing unusual. She checked messages. Clean. Then she noticed something strange, A second app folder, hidden behind a blank icon. Her finger hovered. When she opened it, there was nothing obvious, just a few corporate tools, finance apps, calendars. But one notification sat buried at the bottom. Unknown device connected 3:14 a.m. Janice felt her pulse spike. She glanced back at Trent, still asleep. Her thumb tapped the notification. A location log opened, not just locations, movement patterns, and her name appeared once, Janice Parks, active tracking enabled. Her mouth went dry. She closed the phone instantly like it had burned her. This wasn't a scam call anymore. This was infrastructure. Someone had access. Someone had been inside their life long before Victoria ever spoke. And Trent had either allowed it or installed it. At breakfast, Trent acted normal again. He poured coffee for her, asked if she wanted to go to the gallery later, talked about a client meeting downtown like the world was perfectly intact. Janice watched him carefully now. Every gesture felt like it had two meanings. When he reached across the table to touch her hand, she pulled back slightly without thinking. He noticed. Still thinking about last night, he asked gently. Janice hesitated. Do you ever think someone could pretend to be dead? Trent smiled faintly like the question was innocent. People disappear emotionally all the time. That's probably worse than death. It wasn't an answer. It was a deflection dressed as philosophy. Her phone vibrated. A message. Unknown number. No name. Just text. He never told you what really happened the night she died. Janice's grip tightened around her phone. Trent was still speaking something about traffic downtown, but his voice faded into background noise. Her focus narrowed, because now there were only two possibilities forming in her mind. Either someone was deliberately trying to destroy her marriage, or her marriage had already been built on something rotten. She excused herself from the table. In the bathroom, she locked the door and read the message again. Then again. Her fingers typed before she could stop herself. Who is this? The response came almost instantly. Someone who survived him. Janice felt her breath catch. Another message followed immediately. Ask him about the lake house in Vermont. The name hit her like a memory she never lived. Lake House, Vermont. She stared at the screen, trying to place it. There was nothing. No conversation, no mention, no photos. And yet, her body reacted before her mind did. Unease, deep, instinctive unease. Outside the bathroom door, Trent knocked softly. Janice, everything okay? She stared at the door, then at the phone, then at her reflection in the mirror, and for the first time in her marriage, she didn't know which version of her life was real. She unlocked the door. I'm fine, she said, but her voice didn't sound like hers anymore. That evening, Trent left for a late meeting. Janice sat alone in the living room staring at the city lights beyond their penthouse windows. Everything looked expensive, controlled, perfectly curated, but perfection was starting to feel like a warning sign. Her phone lit up again, unknown number. This time, no message, just a photo. Janice's breath stopped. It was her bedroom, taken from above, from inside the apartment, and at the bottom of the image a single line appeared. You're asking the right questions now? Janice dropped the phone onto the couch like it was alive. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wasn't alone, not ever. And somewhere inside this perfect life Trent built, someone had been watching her long before she ever asked why. Janice Parks didn't sleep that night. The photo kept replaying in her mind like a loop. She couldn't escape her own bedroom scene from above, intimate, violated, impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again, the angle, the shadows, the quiet proof that someone had been inside her life without permission. And worse than fear was the realization that Trent had slept beside her while it was happening. At 3:07 a.m., she sat on the edge of the bed staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the silence of their penthouse. Trent had not come home yet. He said late meeting, but now even those words felt like placeholders for something else. She opened her laptop with trembling hands. Search history, Victoria Hale. At first, the results looked ordinary. Obituary notices, a corporate memorial article, a short statement from Trent's company. We mourn the tragic loss of our colleague Victoria Hale, but something felt off. The language was too clean, too controlled, like grief written by legal counsel instead of people who had actually lost someone. Janice clicked deeper. Victoria Hale. Senior Strategic Consultant, Reed Financial Group. Janice froze at the name of the company. Reed, Trent's last name. Her stomach tightened. She kept scrolling. Accident report summary. Single vehicle crash, Mountain Road in Vermont. No witnesses. Vehicle recovered, burned beyond recognition. But then she noticed something buried in a PDF footnote. Case file sealed under private corporate litigation agreement. Janice leaned closer. Corporate litigation. For a car accident. That wasn't normal. Her pulse quickened as she searched again, this time for any mention of Lake House, Vermont Reed. Nothing public, nothing traceable. It was like the place didn't officially exist. And yet, Victoria had known about it instantly. Her phone vibrated. She almost dropped it. Unknown number again. This time the message was different. You're looking in the right direction, Janice, but you're still looking at the surface. Her breath caught. Before she could respond, another message appeared. Go to the place he never lets you go alone. Janice stared at the screen. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, too quiet, like the walls were listening. She typed slowly. Who are you really? The response came after a pause that felt intentional. I was his wife before you learned how charming he could be. Janice's fingers went cold. Then, and I was the one who learned what happens when you stop being useful to him. The message disappeared. No read receipt. No trace, like it had never existed. But Janice had seen it. And now something inside her shifted from fear into something sharper. Need for truth. By morning, Trent was home. Fresh suit, calm expression, coffee in hand like nothing in the world had changed. Did you sleep at all? He asked, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Janice studied him. Every movement now felt like a performance she was only just learning the script to. I had a weird night, she said carefully. Trent smiled softly. You've been stressed lately. Maybe we should take a weekend somewhere. Just us. Her throat tightened. Vermont, she asked before she could stop herself. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. It was small, but it was there. Not confusion, recognition. Then it vanished. Vermont, he repeated, chuckling lightly. Where did that come from? Janice watched him closely. Just something I read. He nodded too casually. There's nothing in Vermont worth visiting. A lie spoken so smoothly it almost sounded like truth. But Janice was starting to hear the difference. She stood up. I'm going out today, where he asked immediately. Too immediately. She turned to him slowly. Do I need permission? A pause. Then Trent smiled again, softer this time. Of course not. I just like knowing you're safe. Safe. That word again. Janice grabbed her coat and left before she could say something she couldn't take back. She met Megan Collins at a small cafe downtown. Megan was the kind of friend who noticed everything people tried to hide in themselves. You look like you haven't slept in a week, Megan said immediately. Janice didn't waste time. She slid her phone across the table, the photo, the messages. Megan stared at it for a long time without speaking. Finally, she exhaled. This is serious. I know, Janice whispered. Megan lowered her voice. Have you told Trent? Janice almost laughed. About the man who might be involved in this? No. Megan leaned in. Janice, this isn't just paranoia. Whoever did this has access, physical access. I know, Janice said, again quieter now. Megan hesitated. There's something else you should consider. What if this woman Victoria was real, and if she's connected to Trent, then her death might not be what it says on paper. Janice felt a chill run through her. Megan continued carefully. Companies don't seal accident files unless there's liability or intention. Janice swallowed hard. Or control, she whispered. Megan nodded once. Silence settled between them. Then Janice's phone lit up again. Unknown number, a single message. Don't trust your friend. She's already on his radar. Janice's blood turned cold. Megan noticed her expression. What is it? Janice hesitated, then slowly turned her phone away. Nothing, she said. But her voice didn't sound convinced, and neither did Megan's silence. That night, Janice waited until Trent fell asleep. Then she moved. Quietly, carefully, she took his phone from the bedside table. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. No hesitation this time. She went straight to hidden files. And there it was, a folder labeled VT_archive. Her breath stopped. Vermont. She opened it. Photos, documents, logs, and then her own face. Janice froze. There were pictures of her outside her apartment, at the cafe with Megan, walking alone in the city, even one from weeks before she met Trent officially. She scrolled faster, panic rising in her chest. A document caught her eye. Candidate Evaluation Janice Parks. Her knees weakened slightly as she sat down on the edge of the bed. This wasn't a marriage folder. This was a file, a selection process, a structured evaluation of her life, her habits, her vulnerabilities, her relationships. And at the bottom of the document, one line stood out like a knife: suitable replacement after Victoria Hale removal. Janice's breath broke. Suddenly, everything made sense in the worst possible way. Victoria wasn't just a ghost. She was a precedent. And Janice wasn't a wife. She was a continuation. Behind her, the bedroom door creaked slightly. Janice turned slowly. Trent stood there, watching her, not surprised, not confused, just calm. Too calm. You weren't supposed to see that, he said softly. And in that moment, Janice understood something terrifying. This wasn't the beginning of the truth. This was the moment the truth stopped hiding. Trent didn't move when Janice turned to look at him. He simply stood in the doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame, as if he had walked into a room he already knew the layout of in the dark. Janice's fingers tightened around his phone. The screen was still open, still glowing with the file she was never meant to see. Say something. She whispered, her voice unsteady but sharper than she expected. For a moment, Trent said nothing. Not because he didn't have words, but because he was choosing them. Then he stepped inside, calm, controlled, familiar. You weren't supposed to go through that, he said quietly, like he was commenting on a minor inconvenience rather than the collapse of reality. Janice stood up slowly, keeping distance between them. That's all you're going to say? Trent's gaze flicked to the phone in her hand, then back to her face. You're exhausted, he said gently. You've been reading things out of context. That folder is part of corporate security testing. We run simulations, risk assessments. Janice let out a short, broken laugh. Risk assessments, she repeated. For my life, Trent sighed as if she was being unreasonable. That sigh, soft, patient, almost pitying, used to calm her. Tonight it made her skin crawl. "Janice," he said, stepping closer, "you're safe in this house. Everything I do is to protect you. You have to understand that. Protect me from what she shot back, from the woman you told me is dead, from the photos of me being watched like I'm some kind of experiment." Something shifted in Trent's expression. Not anger, not fear. Control, always control. He walked slowly toward the bed and picked up his phone charger, plugging it in with deliberate calmness. Every movement felt like a way of resetting the environment. "You saw a file labeled incorrectly," he said, "and now your mind is filling in gaps that aren't there." Janice shook her head. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Talking like I'm unstable." That landed differently. A pause. Then Trent softened his voice. "I never said you're unstable." But he didn't need to. The implication hung between them anyway. Janice felt something inside her tighten, not fear this time, but something more dangerous. Clarity. She took a step forward. "Victoria Hale, was she your wife?" Trent exhaled slowly, like he had been waiting for this exact question. "Yes," he said. One word, simple, clean. Janice blinked. "And she's dead." "Yes. Then why is she messaging me?" That was the first crack. It was small but real. Trent's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She isn't," he said. "Someone is impersonating her. Likely a coordinated attempt to destabilize my personal life." Janice stared at him. Even now, even here, he was still building explanations instead of telling truth. She knew things Janice said. About me, about this house, about Vermont. At the mention of Vermont, Trent's expression changed again. Faster this time. Controlled again, but not as smooth. "There is no Vermont house," he said immediately. Too fast, too sharp. Janice noticed. "So why is it in your hidden files?" she asked. Silence. This time longer. Trent walked past her, slowly taking his jacket off with deliberate ease, like they were ending a normal conversation instead of standing in the middle of something breaking apart. Then he spoke. "I need you to listen to me carefully," he said. Janice didn't respond. "That file," he continued, "is not what you think it is. It's a predictive behavioral model. We use it for high-level asset protection." Janice let out a sharp breath. "Asset protection?" He nodded. "People in my position, people with my responsibilities, we are targeted constantly, financially, socially, emotionally. You are part of that equation now." Janice's voice rose slightly. "I am not your asset." Trent looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time, something colder entered his tone. "You are my wife," he said simply. That sentence should have meant safety. Instead, it felt like ownership. Janice took another step back. "No," she said quietly. "I think I'm part of something I never agreed to be in." Trent watched her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled, not warmly, not lovingly, but as if he was correcting a misunderstanding. "You think Victoria's contacting you," he said softly. Janice froze. "But you've never spoken to her," he continued. "Not really. Not in a way that can be verified." Janice's heartbeat slowed, because something about that sentence didn't deny Victoria. It reframed her. "You're saying I imagined it?" Janice asked. Trent tilted his head slightly. "I'm saying your mind is being influenced." "By who?" He stepped closer again. "By systems you don't understand." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Janice backed toward the dresser, gripping its edge for support. "Stop talking like this," she said. "Stop talking like I'm a problem to be managed." Trent's voice softened again. "I'm trying to keep you grounded." "No," Janice whispered. "You're trying to keep me contained." That word hung between them. contained. Trent didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the window looking out at the city lights below. The skyline reflected faintly in the glass, overlapping his silhouette like another version of him. When Victoria and I were together, he said finally, she started asking similar questions. Janice went still. She became obsessed with patterns, he continued. Connections that weren't there, people influencing her, watching her. He turned back, and it destroyed her stability. Janice felt something cold crawl through her chest. You're saying she was paranoid? I'm saying, Trent replied carefully, that perception is not always reality. A pause, then he added quieter. And sometimes people convince themselves of stories because the truth is harder to live with. Janice's voice broke slightly. What truth? Trent stepped closer again, but slower this time. Measured. Controlled. The truth, he said gently, is that you are safe here, and you are being manipulated from outside this home. Janice shook her head. By Victoria, yes. And the files, the tracking. The photos of me, Trent, didn't hesitate. Fabricated. The word hit like a slap. Janice stared at him, searching for something, anything that felt human, uncertain, real. But there was none, only calm certainty. That was what terrified her most, because lies usually had cracks. This didn't. This was smooth, engineered, believable, and she hated that a part of her almost wanted to believe him. Her phone buzzed again. She looked down instinctively. Unknown number. One message. Don't let him rewrite you. Janice's breath stopped. Trent noticed her reaction immediately. What is it? He asked. Janice didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Another message appeared. Ask him what he did to me in Vermont. Janice looked up slowly. Trent was watching her now, not impatient, not confused, just waiting. And suddenly Janice understood something far worse than fear. This wasn't about believing one version of truth. It was about deciding who had the power to define it. Trent stepped forward slightly. Janice, he said softly, put the phone down. Her grip tightened instead. For the first time in their marriage, she didn't move. And in that silence, something between them finally shifted beyond repair. Janice didn't sleep after that night. Not because Trent raised his voice, not because he admitted anything, but because he didn't. He had stayed calm, too calm, like nothing she said had actually landed in him, and that was what kept echoing in her mind as she sat alone in the kitchen at 4:12 a.m., staring at the black screen of her phone like it might suddenly start speaking again. Trent had gone to work early. He kissed her forehead before leaving, asked if she wanted anything from the city, told her to rest today. Rest. As if her mind was something that could simply be shut off. The moment the door closed, Janice felt the silence of the penthouse change shape. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt exposed. She opened her laptop again, hands slower this time, more deliberate, like she was afraid even her movements might trigger something. There was one goal now, Victoria Hale. Not the obituary, not the corporate statements, something real, something unfiltered. She typed variations of the name into search engines' databases, anything she could access. Nothing new appeared, but that wasn't what scared her. What scared her was how clean everything was. Too clean, like someone had rewritten the record of a human life and removed every imperfect trace. Janice leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. And then her email pinged. Once, then again. No subject line, no sender name, just an address made of random characters. Her breath caught. She didn't click immediately. She stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Her body already knew what it was before her mind accepted it. Finally, she opened it. The screen went white. Then text appeared. You are not the first version of this story, Janice. Her stomach tightened instantly. Another line followed. But you are the first one who is still inside it. Janice sat motionless. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad but didn't move. Then a third line appeared. If you want to understand what he is, stop asking who Victoria was. A pause. Then ask what he does to women who start remembering. Janice felt her throat go dry. She clicked reply before she could stop herself. Who are you? The response came instantly, like it had been waiting, someone who stopped forgetting. Her heartbeat quickened. Another message followed immediately. Victoria Hale. Janice froze so hard it felt like her entire body had locked. No scammer would do that. No prankster would commit that far into identity. Her fingers shook as she typed, "You're dead." 3 dots appeared, then stopped, then appeared again. Finally, that was the version he needed people to believe. Janice stood up from the chair without realizing it. Her legs felt weak. She walked toward the window, instinctively looking down at the city below. Cars moved like nothing in the world had ever broken, but her world wasn't stable anymore. It was layered, and something beneath it was starting to show through. Her phone buzzed again. This time, not email. Text message, same unknown number from before. He told you I was unstable. That's his favorite version of me. Janice's breath hitched. Another message followed immediately. Because it's easier to discredit a woman than explain why she disappeared. Her hands tightened around the phone. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Because every part of her was now caught between 2 collapsing truths, Trent's calm certainty, and this voice that felt like it had lived inside her silence for too long. Then a third message. Ask him about the lake house in Vermont. Janice went still. Again. That name. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a trigger, a key, something every thread kept pulling her back to. Before she could think further, the email refreshed automatically. A file attached, no warning, no description, just a single document. Janice hesitated for a long moment, then opened it. The screen filled with scanned pages, handwritten notes, medical terminology, behavioral tracking logs. Her breath slowed as she read. Subject Behavioral Compatibility Study, Janice Parks, her name, printed like she was already classified. She scrolled faster. Pages of observations, her routines, her emotional reactions, her friendships, even her past relationships before Trent, every detail catalogued like data, like she had been analyzed long before she ever made a choice. Then she saw it, a section highlighted in red. Replacement selection, trigger activation after Victoria Hale disengagement event. Her knees weakened. She grabbed the edge of the counter for support. Replacement, not wife, not partner. Replacement. Her mind struggled to process it in real time, but her body already understood the violation. This wasn't just surveillance, it was design. She scrolled further down. A final note at the bottom of the document. Subject remains unaware of prior exposure to original subject, Victoria Hale. Maintain controlled narrative environment until stabilization of replacement bond. Janice whispered without realizing it. Bond? Her voice cracked on the word, and suddenly every memory with Trent shifted slightly, the way he listened too closely, the way he always seemed to anticipate her emotional state, the way he corrected her gently when she questioned things. It didn't feel like love anymore. It felt like calibration. Her phone buzzed again. Victoria, now you understand why I ran. Janice's eyes filled with tears. She didn't fully register yet. She typed quickly, "What happened to you?" The response took longer this time. Not instant, not rehearsed. When it came, it was shorter than everything else. I started asking questions at the wrong time. Another pause. Then, and he started calling it instability. Janice's breath caught. A noise from the hallway made her flinch. She turned sharply. Nothing. Empty silence. But her body didn't believe in empty anymore. It believed in presence, in unseen observation. She looked back at her phone. Another message. He will come home soon, and he will look at you like nothing has changed. Janice swallowed hard. As if summoned by the sentence itself, her phone rang immediately after. Trent! She hesitated, then answered. Hey, his voice came through warm, steady, familiar. Too familiar. Everything okay, he asked. Janice forced her voice to remain steady. Yeah. A pause. You sound tired, he said softly. I didn't sleep well. I told you to rest, he replied, almost gently disappointed. You're pushing yourself too hard lately. That phrase again. Rest. Pushing. Too hard. As if her perception was a system that needed correction, Janice closed her eyes briefly. I'm fine, she said. A pause. Then Trent's voice softened. I'll be home earlier tonight, he said. We can have dinner together. No distractions. No distractions. The words lingered after the call ended. Janice lowered the phone slowly. On the screen, Victoria's last message was still visible. Don't let him see that you're waking up. Janice stood in the middle of the kitchen completely still. Outside, the city continued moving. Inside, something irreversible had already begun, and for the first time, Janice didn't feel like she was living in a marriage. She felt like she was inside a system that noticed when she started to think differently. And systems like that never let awareness go unnoticed for long. Janice stopped pretending everything was normal the moment Trent walked through the door that evening. He looked exactly the same as always, tailored suit, calm posture, that familiar, controlled warmth in his eyes. But now she noticed things she had never questioned before. The way he scanned the room before speaking. The way his gaze always found her first. The way he paused just slightly as if confirming she was still aligned with the version of herself he expected. Hey, Trent, said softly, loosening his tie. You look better today. Janice sat on the couch phone clenched in her hand. Do I? He smiled. Less stressed. That's good. She didn't respond. He walked closer, sitting beside her with deliberate ease as if nothing in the past 48 hours had changed the architecture of their relationship. I thought we could go somewhere this weekend, he said. Just us. Get out of the city. Janice's fingers tightened slightly. Vermont. The air shifted instantly, not dramatically, but precisely. A pause too clean to be natural. Then Trent gave a soft, almost amused exhale. Still on that, Janice studied him. Why is it such a strange question? It's not strange, he said gently. It's just random. Is it? His smile didn't change, but something behind it sharpened slightly. Where did you hear that name again? Janice hesitated. Victoria's messages flashed in her mind. Don't let him see that you're waking up. I read it somewhere, she said finally. Trent nodded slowly like he was accepting a minor inconvenience rather than a fracture in trust. Janice, he said, lowering his voice slightly, you've been exposed to something online that's not healthy for you. There it was again. Not wrong, not false, just framed, reframed. She felt it like pressure against her chest. I didn't imagine it, she said quietly. Trent looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. You're overwhelmed, he said. And when people are overwhelmed, they start connecting unrelated things. Janice didn't pull her hand away this time. She just stared at him. You always explain things like, I'm breaking, she said. That landed differently. A silence stretched, not uncomfortable, controlled. Then Trent softened his voice again. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? She asked. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm keeping you grounded, he said. Janice almost laughed because she suddenly understood something terrifying. Every version of reality Trent offered always ended in her needing correction, never him needing explanation. Her phone vibrated in her lap. She didn't even look at the screen this time. She already knew. Victoria. She stood up abruptly. I need air, she said. Trent rose slightly. Janice, but she was already moving. She didn't go far. Just the rooftop terrace of their building. Cold air hit her face instantly, sharp enough to cut through the fog in her mind. Below, the city of Westbridge Hills glowed like it was untouched by anything human and fragile. Janice finally looked at her phone. One message. He's recalibrating you again. Her breath hitched. Another followed. Ask him what happened in Vermont. Not the story, the night. Janice closed her eyes. For the first time, she didn't feel confusion. She felt direction. Not trust, not certainty, but something sharper. Pattern recognition. She went back inside 20 minutes later. Trent was in the kitchen, waiting, not pacing, not anxious, just waiting like he knew she would return. You went upstairs? He said calmly. Janice stopped. Yes. A pause. You needed space, he said, as if confirming a prediction. She studied him. Why do you always already know what I'm going to do? That question finally made something flicker in his expression. Not fear, not anger, interest. You think I predict you, he asked. Janice didn't answer. Trent walked toward her slowly. I observe you, he said. That's not the same thing. That sounds worse, she replied quietly. He stopped a few feet away. Janice, he said gently, you're starting to see patterns where there are none. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. Trent noticed anyway. His gaze dropped slightly. Who is texting you? He asked. Janice hesitated. This was the moment. The pivot. She could lie. She could deflect. She could stay inside the version of reality he maintained. But something inside her had already moved past that threshold. I don't know, she said honestly. Trent nodded slowly. Let me see. Janice froze. Why, she asked. Because I need to understand what's influencing you. That word again. Influencing. Not communication. Not concern. Influence. She stepped back slightly. No. The room went still, not tense, measuring. Trent's voice lowered. Janice, if someone is contacting you, I need to assess the risk. That's what you always say, she whispered. He tilted his head slightly, because it's true. But now Janice saw something else beneath it, not protection, containment logic. She shook her head slowly. I think you're the risk. Silence. Not immediate reaction, but recalculation. Then Trent spoke softly. That's not your thought. Janice blinked. What? That's not yours, he repeated calmly. Someone is feeding you a narrative. Her stomach dropped because it didn't sound like denial. It sounded like diagnosis, like she had just expressed a symptom. She stepped back again. Stop doing that, she said. Doing what? Turning everything I say into something wrong with me. Trent exhaled slowly, and for the first time something harder entered his voice. I think you should sit down. No. Janice! She shook her head. No. A long pause. Then Trent said something quieter. I don't think you're safe right now. That sentence landed heavier than anything before it, because it didn't accuse her. It removed her agency. Janice felt her pulse spike. I'm not staying here, she said. Trent didn't move, just watched her carefully. You're emotional, he said. That's not a reason to control me. It's a reason to stabilize you. The word hit like a lock clicking shut. Janice's phone vibrated again. Victoria's message appeared. He's about to isolate you. Janice looked up sharply. Trent noticed the shift immediately. What did it say? He asked. Janice tightened her grip. For a second, she almost gave it to him. Almost. But then she remembered the file. Replacement. Behavioral control. Observations. And something inside her shifted again. No, she said quietly. Trent stepped forward slightly. Janice, give me the phone. This time there was no softness in his voice, only authority. She backed away, and for the first time in their marriage, she said the one sentence that changed everything. You don't get to decide what's real for me anymore. The silence that followed was different. Not tense, not emotional, structural, like something foundational had just cracked. Trent looked at her for a long moment, then calmly said, I think we need to reset this conversation. And Janice realized with sudden clarity he didn't see her as arguing. He saw her as deviating. Trent didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That was the most unsettling part. He simply stood there in the center of their penthouse living room, watching Janice like he was recalibrating something that had drifted slightly out of alignment. I think Trent said calmly, we should take a break from outside communication for a while. Janice blinked slowly. What? He walked toward her unhurried. Just temporary. Until we understand what's influencing your thoughts. Janice let out a short, disbelieving laugh, influencing my thoughts. Trent? I'm not Janice, he interrupted gently, and that gentle tone made it worse. I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting you. She stepped back instinctively. From what? My own phone. Trent stopped a few feet away, studying her face, like he was trying to locate where the change had started. From instability, he said simply. That word again. Janice felt something inside her tighten, not fear this time, but resistance. Real resistance. I'm not unstable, she said quietly. Trent tilted his head slightly. That's not what I said, but it was what he meant. It always was. Her phone vibrated again in her hand. She didn't need to look. Victoria. Janice held it tighter. Trent noticed immediately. Give it to me, he said. No. The word came out sharper than she expected. A pause. Something shifted in Trent's expression. Not anger, not yet. More like evaluation. You're escalating, he said softly. I'm not escalating, Janice replied. I'm reacting. That's the same thing when perception is compromised. Janice stared at him, and suddenly it hit her in a way it hadn't before. He wasn't arguing with her reality. He was overriding it, like her version of events was just a faulty input in a system he controlled. She took another step back. I want to leave, she said. Trent exhaled slowly, like she had said something mathematically incorrect. You can't leave right now, he said. Janice froze. The words were simple, clean, but absolute. What do you mean I can't leave? She asked slowly. Trent's voice softened again. You're not in a condition to make that decision clearly. Janice shook her head. That's not your decision. A silence stretched between them, longer now. He studied her carefully, not like a husband, like someone observing deviation thresholds. Then he said something that made her stomach drop. I think we need to activate support protocol. Janice frowned. What does that mean? Trent reached for his phone. Janice, he said calmly, I'm calling someone to help stabilize you. Her heart began to race. No, she said quickly. No, don't do that. But he had already unlocked the phone, and in that moment something in Janice snapped into motion. She ran, not toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the secondary exit she had once noticed but never questioned. Behind her, Trent didn't chase immediately. That was worse. He spoke instead. "Janice, stop! You're making this worse." Her pulse roared in her ears as she reached the hallway. Her hand hit the emergency exit handle, locked. Of course it was locked. Her breath broke slightly. Then she heard footsteps behind her, slow, measured, not rushed. Trent appeared at the end of the hallway, still calm, still controlled. "Janice," he said gently, "you're not thinking clearly right now." She turned toward him, shaking. "You locked the exit." "No," he said. "It's standard security protocol for the building. I just manage the access." That word again. Manage. Her phone buzzed violently in her hand. Victoria. She looked down instinctively. One message. "He's switching to containment mode." Janice swallowed hard. When she looked up again, Trent had moved closer. Not aggressively, but closing distance. "I don't want to escalate this," he said softly. "Then let me leave," Janice replied. Trent shook his head slightly. "Not like this." "Like what?" "Like this version of you." That sentence hit harder than anything before. Janice felt her chest tighten. "What version of me?" she asked quietly. Trent stepped closer again. "The one that's being influenced," he said. Janice shook her head. "Stop saying that. I'm trying to help you," he said. "No," she whispered. "You're trying to correct me?" Silence. For a moment, something almost human flickered across Trent's face. Not softness, not empathy, recognition of escalation. Then it disappeared. "I need you to come back inside," he said. "I am inside," Janice replied. "I'm inside your version of me." That landed differently. Trent paused, longer this time, then said quietly, "That's not what this is." Janice held her phone tighter. "You want it back?" she asked suddenly. Trent didn't answer immediately. "Yes," he said finally. She looked at him, then slowly raised the phone. "Then tell me one thing," she said. Trent didn't move. "Did you ever love Victoria Hale a shift? Subtle, almost invisible, but real." Janice saw it. For the first time, not fear, not anger, something deeper, containment pressure increasing. He chose his words carefully. "I cared about her," he said. Janice shook her head. "That's not what I asked." A pause. Then Trent stepped closer again. "Janice," he said softly, "this isn't helping you." But she didn't back down. "Answer me." Silence stretched. And in that silence, something inside Janice sharpened. Because she realized something terrifying. He wasn't avoiding the question because it was painful. He was avoiding it because it disrupted structure. Finally, Trent spoke. "Yes," he said. One word. Controlled. Measured. Janice blinked. The honesty hit harder than denial would have. Trent continued quietly. "I cared about her, and I also had to make decisions that weren't emotionally simple." Janice's stomach dropped. "Decisions," she repeated. Trent nodded slightly. Janice stepped back instinctively. "What decisions?" Another pause, longer, and then Trent's phone rang. He looked at it briefly, then at Janice, then answered. "Yeah," he said. A voice came through faintly, not fully audible, but enough for Janice to hear urgency. Trent listened for a few seconds, then said, "Don't escalate it. I'll handle it." He hung up. Janice stared at him. "Who was that?" Trent put the phone back in his pocket slowly. "Support team," he said. Her blood ran cold. "You're calling people about me," she whispered. I'm trying to prevent a breakdown, he replied. Janice shook her head, backing toward the hallway exit again. I'm not staying here, she said. Trent didn't move, just watched her carefully. Then said something calm, almost final. If you leave right now, Janice, you will not understand what's happening to you. She froze. That sentence wasn't a threat, it was worse. It was certainty. And behind it was the implication that she was already inside something she couldn't interpret alone. Janice looked at him, at the man she had married, at the system she had entered without knowing it had walls. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she was talking to her husband. She felt like she was talking to the architect of her reality. Janice didn't remember making the decision to leave. Her body made it before her mind could catch up. The moment Trent stepped forward again, calm and composed like he still believed this conversation belonged to him, Janice turned and ran down the hallway toward the private elevator. Behind her, his voice followed, not angry, not panicked. Janice, just her name, controlled, measured, like he still believed he could stop her with tone alone. Her fingers slammed against the elevator button repeatedly. Nothing. Of course, restricted access. She spun around sharply, heart pounding. Trent was walking toward her now, unhurried, his expression unreadable. You're frightening yourself, he said softly. No, Janice whispered. I'm finally listening to myself. For the first time all night, something hard flashed across Trent's face, gone almost instantly, but she saw it, a fracture in the mask. You are exhausted, he said, and someone is exploiting that. Victoria. Yes. Janice laughed bitterly, tears stinging her eyes. You keep saying her name like she's some hallucination. She's dangerous, Trent replied quietly. That word hit differently. Not dead. Dangerous, Janice noticed immediately. You didn't say she was dead this time. Silence. A mistake. Tiny, but real. Trent stopped walking, and suddenly the space between them felt like a battlefield neither of them had planned to enter this quickly. Janice's phone buzzed violently in her hand. Victoria. One message, floor 32, service, stairwell camera, blind spot. Move now. Janice's pulse spiked. She looked instinctively toward the side corridor. Trent noticed. Too fast. His eyes narrowed slightly. Who's helping you? He asked. Janice didn't answer. That was answer enough. Trent moved toward her faster this time. Not aggressive, efficient. Janice bolted. She sprinted down the side corridor heels, slipping slightly against polished marble flooring. Her breath came sharp and uneven as she pushed through the heavy stairwell door. Cold concrete air hit her instantly. The door slammed behind her. For 1 second, silence. Then her phone buzzed again. Down 3 floors. Hurry! Janice gripped the railing and ran. Floor 34, 33, 34. Her lungs burned, and beneath the panic, another realization clawed its way upward. Victoria knew this building. Not generally, intimately, like someone who had lived inside its systems before. Janice burst through the door onto the 32nd floor maintenance corridor. Dark, industrial, empty. At the far end, a single figure stood beneath flickering fluorescent light. Female. Still. Watching her. Janice stopped breathing. The woman stepped slightly forward. Blonde hair cut shorter than in the old corporate photos. Dark coat. Sharp eyes carrying exhaustion so deep it almost looked permanent. Alive. Victoria Hale. Janice's knees nearly gave out. Oh my God. Victoria didn't smile, didn't dramatize the moment. She simply looked at Janice with the expression of someone seeing history repeat itself. "He's closer than you think," Victoria said calmly. Janice stared at her. "You're alive?" Victoria's eyes flickered briefly. Barely. Footsteps echoed faintly somewhere above them. "Trent." Victoria grabbed Janice's wrist immediately. "Move." Janice stumbled after her through a maintenance hallway hidden behind electrical panels and storage units. Victoria moved quickly, confidently, like she knew every blind spot in the building. "How do you know this place?" Janice whispered breathlessly. Victoria glanced back once. "Because I helped design parts of it." Janice froze slightly. "What?" Victoria stopped near a locked utility door and entered a code without hesitation. Click. Door open. She pulled Janice inside. The room was small and dark, filled with server equipment humming softly in the background. Only then did Victoria finally turn fully toward her. Up close, she looked different from the polished woman in the old online photos. Harder, thinner, like survival had carved away every unnecessary softness. But her eyes held the exact same calm intelligence Janice imagined when reading those messages. "You really are alive," Janice whispered again. Victoria nodded once. Yes. The simplicity of it almost hurt. Janice shook her head slowly. "Trent said you died in a car accident." Victoria let out a humorless laugh. "Trent says many things." Janice stared at her emotions colliding too fast to process cleanly. Fear, relief, confusion, anger. "You've been watching me," Janice said quietly. Victoria didn't deny it. "Yes." "Why?" A long silence settled between them. Then Victoria answered honestly, "Because I needed to know whether he was turning you into another version of me." Janice felt chills spread down her arms. "What does that mean?" Victoria looked at her carefully. "He doesn't choose women randomly," she said. "He studies them, patterns them, adjusts to them emotionally until they stop recognizing where his voice ends and their thoughts begin." Janice's stomach tightened. "No," she whispered. "That's insane." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's what I said too." The server lights flickered faintly across the room. Outside, distant footsteps echoed somewhere in the corridor again. Victoria lowered her voice. "You need to understand something quickly, Janice. Trent does not experience love the way normal people do." Janice crossed her arms tightly around herself. "Then what does he experience?" Victoria's expression darkened slightly. "Possession," she said. The words settled heavily between them. Janice looked away first. Because deep down, some part of her already knew that answer. Victoria continued carefully. "At first it feels like protection, attention, stability. He learns everything about you so perfectly that it feels like intimacy." Janice's chest tightened painfully. That was exactly how Trent had loved her. Precisely, completely. Like he had memorized her emotional architecture before she even spoke. Victoria saw realization spreading across Janice's face. "He builds dependency slowly," Victoria said. "Financially, emotionally, socially. By the time you notice control, your reality already includes him as the interpreter of everything." Janice whispered without meaning to. "He always says he's keeping me grounded." Victoria's expression went still. "Of course he does." Silence. Janice's breathing became uneven again. "Why fake your death?" she asked finally. For the first time, Victoria looked genuinely tired. "Because leaving normally didn't work." Janice stared at her. Victoria continued quietly. "I tried divorce, distance, lawyers, restraining orders. None of it mattered. Trent doesn't accept abandonment. He reframes it how Victoria looked directly into her eyes. He turns your resistance into evidence that you're unstable. The words hit Janice so hard she physically stepped back. Because Trent had already started doing exactly that, Victoria noticed immediately. He's saying it now, isn't he? Janice couldn't answer. That silence answered for her. Victoria exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, she whispered. Janice looked at her sharply. Sorry for what Victoria's eyes filled with something dangerously close to guilt, for not realizing soon enough that he had already chosen you before I disappeared. Janice felt her blood run cold. What? Victoria looked away briefly, then back. You think meeting Trent was accidental? She asked softly. Silence. Janice's heartbeat slowed, not from calmness, from dread. Victoria stepped closer. He knew who you were long before your first date. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too real. Janice shook her head instinctively. No. Victoria's expression broke slightly for the first time. Yes. Then she said the sentence that shattered whatever remained of Janice's old reality. You were never his next love, Janice. A pause. You were his replacement plan. The words didn't fully register at first. You were his replacement plan. Janice stared at Victoria as if language itself had stopped making sense. The server room hummed quietly around them, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, but everything felt distant now, muted beneath the violent pounding of her heartbeat. No, Janice whispered automatically. Victoria didn't argue, didn't push. That somehow made it worse. You're lying, Janice said again, but her voice sounded thinner this time, less certain. Victoria leaned against the metal server rack behind her, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. I wish I was. Janice shook her head slowly, trying to force reality back into recognizable shape. Trent met me at a charity gala, she said. We ran into each other by accident. Victoria's eyes softened, not with sympathy, but recognition. That's what I thought too. Janice's stomach twisted. No, she snapped. No, you don't get to just say things like that and expect me to believe Janice. Victoria's voice cut through sharply for the first time. He already knew your favorite wine before he introduced himself, didn't he? Janice froze. Because, yes, he had. At the time, it felt romantic, attentive. Now it felt surgical. Victoria watched realization flicker across Janice's face and continued quietly. He knew which charities you donated to. Silence. He knew your father died when you were 19. Janice's breathing slowed. He knew you hated loud restaurants because crowds make you anxious. Janice stepped backwards slightly. Because Trent had known all those things before she ever remembered telling him. At the time, she thought she was lucky, chosen, seen. Now every memory was rearranging itself into something colder. How? Janice whispered. Victoria crossed her arms tightly. Because Trent researches women before he approaches them. No. He studies emotional compatibility patterns, trauma history, attachment response, isolation risk. Janice felt sick. That's insane. Victoria nodded once. Yes. The simplicity of the answer shattered something inside Janice more than denial would have. She turned away, pressing both hands against her temples. No, no. You're twisting things. You're making normal things sound creepy. Victoria stayed quiet. That silence forced Janice to keep talking. He loved me. The second the words left her mouth, she hated how desperate they sounded. Victoria's expression softened slightly, not judgmental, just sad. I think Trent experiences attachment, she said carefully. But not love the way you mean it. Janice turned sharply. You don't know what we had. Victoria looked directly at her. Yes, she said quietly. I do. Silence slammed between them. Because that was the horrifying part. Victoria did know. Not theoretically, practically, intimately. Janice suddenly remembered something she hadn't thought about in years. The first time she met Trent, the gala ballroom, the exact moment he walked over. He had smiled like he already knew her. At the time, it felt comforting. Now it felt premeditated. Her knees weakened slightly. Victoria noticed. "There's more," she said carefully. Janice laughed bitterly. "Of course there is." Victoria hesitated briefly before pulling a small flash drive from her coat pocket. "I copied files before I disappeared." Janice stared at it. "What kind of files?" Victoria's expression hardened slightly. "The kind that explain why Trent never panics." Janice frowned. Victoria continued quietly. "Because everything around him is structured, controlled, documented, including people." Janice shook her head slowly. "You keep talking about him like he's running some experiment." Victoria didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was enough. Janice's chest tightened. "Oh my God." Victoria looked away briefly, then back. "There was an internal behavioral division attached to Reed Financial," she said. "Officially, it focused on executive security profiling." Janice's stomach dropped. "But unofficially..." Victoria stopped. Janice stepped closer. Unofficially, what Victoria met her gaze directly, they studied emotional dependency models. The room suddenly felt colder. Janice's voice came out barely above a whisper. On who Victoria's answer was immediate. Partners, employees, vulnerable social targets. Janice stared at her in disbelief. "No." Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. "I helped build parts of it. That hit harder than anything else." Janice blinked slowly. "You were a part of this." Victoria looked genuinely ashamed for the first time. "I didn't understand what it was becoming at first," she said quietly. "By the time I did, Trent had already integrated it into his personal life." Janice backed away instinctively. "So, you helped him..." Victoria accepted the accusation without defending herself. "Yes." Silence. Heavy. Ugly. Janice wrapped her arms around herself tightly, suddenly unsure whether she should trust either of them anymore. Victoria noticed immediately. "You shouldn't trust me completely," she admitted. Janice looked up sharply. Victoria continued calmly. "I'm not innocent in this story." That honesty unsettled Janice more than manipulation would have, because manipulative people usually fought to look good. Victoria looked tired of pretending altogether. "Then why help me?" Janice asked. Victoria stared at her for a long moment before answering. "Because when I saw your file," she said softly, "I realized he was starting over." Janice's pulse quickened again. "My file?" Victoria nodded. "You weren't just chosen because you were compatible. You were chosen because you were recoverable." Janice frowned. "Recoverable, you had grief history, isolation markers, high emotional loyalty response." Victoria's voice grew quieter. "People like Trent look for women who confuse devotion with safety." The words sliced through her. Because that had been true. After her father died, Janice spent years craving stability, predictability, someone who made chaos disappear. And Trent had arrived like certainty itself. Perfect certainty. Too perfect. Tears burned suddenly behind her eyes. Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Janice." "No." Janice whispered. "Don't." She couldn't bear sympathy right now, not from the woman who might have helped build the cage she was trapped inside. The server room fell silent except for the low mechanical hum around them. Then Victoria's phone vibrated sharply. Her face changed instantly. Alert. Danger. "What?" Janice asked. Victoria looked at the screen briefly, then swore under her breath. "What is it?" Victoria grabbed her coat immediately. He found the blind spot. Janice's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" It means Trent knows where we are now. Fear shot through Janice instantly. How Victoria looked at her phone. Because there are almost no real blind spots anymore. Footsteps echoed faintly somewhere outside the hallway. Closer this time. Measured. Not rushed. Trent! Victoria moved quickly toward the back exit of the server room. We have maybe 2 minutes. Janice stood frozen. I can't do this. Victoria grabbed her arm sharply. Yes, you can. Janice looked at her, panic rising fast. I don't even know what's real anymore. Victoria's eyes locked onto hers. That confusion, she said quietly. That's how he keeps control. The footsteps outside grew louder, closer, steadier. Then a calm voice echoed faintly through the hallway outside the door. Janice. Trent. Not angry, not shouting. That somehow made it infinitely worse. Victoria immediately killed the room lights. Darkness swallowed them whole. Janice's breathing turned uneven. Outside the server room door, Trent's footsteps stopped. Silence. Then his voice came again, soft and terrifyingly calm. You don't have to hide from me. Janice felt pure fear crawl down her spine for the first time. Because he didn't sound like a husband searching for his wife. He sounded like someone retrieving something that belonged to him. Darkness swallowed the server room whole. Janice could hear her own heartbeat so loudly it almost drowned out everything else. Outside the door, Trent stood perfectly still. No pounding, no threats, no anger. That calmness was becoming more terrifying than violence ever could have been. You don't have to hide from me, he repeated softly through the metal door. Victoria moved silently beside Janice, pulling open a narrow maintenance hatch hidden behind one of the server racks. Move, she whispered. Janice hesitated, not because she didn't want to escape, because part of her still couldn't fully accept this reality. Trent was her husband, the man who made her coffee every morning, the man who held her after nightmares, the man who memorized how she liked blankets folded and how she hated thunderstorms. How could that same man now feel like a threat standing outside a locked room? Victoria grabbed her wrist harder. Janice? The urgency in her voice snapped something loose. Janice crawled into the hatch. Victoria followed behind her, sealing it quietly, just as Trent's voice came again. Victoria. The way he said her name made Janice shiver. Not hatred, not grief, recognition, like unfinished business. The narrow tunnel smelled like dust and metal wiring. Janice crawled forward on shaking hands while Victoria moved quickly behind her. He knows this building too well, Janice whispered. Victoria's voice came low and tight. Because he financed most of its infrastructure. Of course he did. Janice almost laughed from the absurd horror of it all. Every escape route felt like it belonged to him already. Behind them, faint metallic sounds echoed, the server room door opening. Trent had gone inside. Janice's breathing quickened instantly. He'll find us. Not immediately, Victoria replied, but even she didn't sound fully convinced anymore. The tunnel opened into another maintenance corridor several floors below. Victoria dropped down first, then helped Janice after her. The hallway was dim and unfinished, lined with exposed pipes and concrete walls. Victoria pulled out her phone, checking something rapidly. Then her expression darkened. What? Janice asked. Victoria looked up slowly. He disabled elevator access. Janice stared at her. How? Victoria gave a hollow laugh. Because Trent doesn't react emotionally first. He reacts structurally. The sentence hit with sickening clarity. That was exactly what made him terrifying. Not rage. Control. Always control. Janice leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. I can't do this, she whispered again. Victoria looked at her carefully. Yes, you can. No, I mean it, Janice said, voice cracking. Everything feels unreal. Every memory I have with him, every good thing, it all feels contaminated now. Victoria's expression softened slightly. That's the hardest part, she said quietly. Not realizing he manipulated you. Janice looked at her. It's realizing some of it still felt real anyway. Silence settled heavily between them. Because that was true too. Trent had controlled, manipulated, observed. But he had also listened to her for hours when she cried about her father. He remembered tiny details nobody else cared about. He made her feel chosen, special, safe. Janice suddenly covered her face with both hands. "Oh my God," she whispered brokenly. "What if I still love him?" Victoria didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something dangerously close to sorrow. "You probably do." Janice looked up sharply, tears burning in her eyes. Victoria continued quietly. "Control doesn't erase attachment. That's why people like him are so dangerous." The corridor lights flickered once overhead. Janice swallowed hard. "I don't understand him." Victoria's gaze hardened slightly. "That's because you're trying to understand him emotionally. Then how do I understand him?" Victoria hesitated, then answered carefully. "Think of Trent like someone who cannot tolerate uncertainty." Janice frowned slightly. Victoria continued. "He builds systems around people because systems are predictable, controlled, safe. Love to him is stability through possession." Janice felt sick again. "He doesn't see me as a person." Victoria looked directly at her. "He sees you as regulation." The word landed heavily. Not wife, not partner. Regulation. Janice leaned back against the wall, exhausted. Somewhere above them, distant footsteps echoed again. Closer, slow, searching. Victoria immediately straightened. "We need to move." Janice grabbed her arm suddenly. "Wait!" Victoria stopped. Janice's voice trembled slightly. "Tell me what happened in Vermont." For the first time since they met face to face, Victoria looked genuinely unsettled. "That's not important right now?" "Yes, it is." Victoria glanced toward the hallway nervously. "Janice, tell me." Silence. Then Victoria exhaled slowly. "The lake house was supposed to be temporary," she said quietly. "A retreat. Somewhere private." Janice listened carefully. But Trent had already started changing by then. How Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. He became obsessed with patterns, schedules, monitoring emotional responses. Janice felt cold all over. Victoria continued. "At first it seemed harmless. He just noticed everything." Janice closed her eyes briefly. That sounded painfully familiar. Then he started documenting things Victoria said. Mood shifts, reactions, conflict triggers, Janice whispered. "Like research." Victoria nodded once. "Yes." Silence. Then Victoria said the sentence Janice would never forget. "One night I realized he knew what I was going to say before I said it." Janice opened her eyes again slowly. Victoria looked away. And he liked that. A chill crawled through Janice's spine. What happened the night of the accident? Victoria went completely still. For several seconds, she didn't speak. Then finally, I told him I was leaving. Silence. And Victoria swallowed hard. And he smiled. Janice's stomach tightened violently. Victoria continued softly, not angry, not emotional, just calm. Her voice cracked slightly for the first time, like he had already prepared for that possibility. Janice's chest tightened painfully. What did he do? Victoria's eyes grew distant. He said if I left him suddenly, people would misunderstand my emotional state. Janice felt her blood run cold, because that sounded exactly like Trent. Careful, clinical, reframing. Victoria continued quietly. I realized then that he had already spent months creating a version of me that looked unstable to other people. Janice whispered, "Oh my God." Victoria nodded slowly. The accident happened 3 days later. Silence slammed into the corridor. Janice stared at her. "Did he try to kill you?" Victoria's expression darkened. "I don't know." That answer was somehow more horrifying. Because uncertainty meant ambiguity, and ambiguity protected people like Trent. Victoria suddenly looked sharply toward the corridor intersection. Footsteps. Much closer now. Janice heard them too. Steady, unhurried. "Trent." Victoria grabbed Janice's arm immediately. "We move now." But before they could take a step, a calm voice echoed through the corridor ahead of them. "You always choose the maintenance routes first, Victoria." Both women froze instantly. At the far end of the hallway, Trent stepped into view, perfectly composed, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes locked directly onto Janice. Then softly, "Come home." Janice felt terror spread through her chest, because he didn't sound angry. He sounded patient, like this entire nightmare was just another phase he fully expected her to move through before returning to him. The corridor went completely silent. Janice couldn't breathe. At the far end of the dim concrete hallway, Trent stood beneath flickering fluorescent lights like he belonged there more than anyone else. Calm, controlled, perfectly composed. "Come home," he repeated softly. Victoria stepped slightly in front of Janice instinctively. Trent's eyes shifted toward her. Not surprise, recognition. "You shouldn't have contacted her," he said calmly. Victoria's voice turned cold. "You shouldn't have built another version of me." A faint smile touched Trent's face. Not warm, not amused, just acknowledgement. "You always misunderstand intention," he replied. Janice felt sick listening to them talk. Not like ex-lovers, not even like enemies, like two people who had once built something dangerous together and knew exactly where the weak points were. Trent looked back at Janice. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. The question hit her harder than if he had screamed, because part of him still sounded sincerely concerned. That was the nightmare, not that he felt monstrous, that he still sounded loving while dismantling her reality, piece by piece. Janice's voice came out shaking. "Don't." Trent's expression softened instantly. "Janice." "No," she whispered. "Don't say my name like everything's normal." A pause. Then Trent sighed quietly, almost sadly. "This isn't what you think it is." Victoria let out a bitter laugh beside her. "There it is." Trent ignored her completely. His eyes never left Janice. "You're overwhelmed right now," he said. "And she's feeding that confusion." Janice shook her head. "You tracked me to protect you. You studied me before we met. I needed compatibility, certainty." Janice stared at him in disbelief. "You say these things like they're reasonable." For the first time, Trent's expression shifted slightly. Confusion, not fake, real confusion. "Because they are," he said quietly. That answer terrified her more than anything else. Because he genuinely believed it. Victoria stepped forward slightly. "You hear that, Janice?" That's the problem. He never understands where care ends and control begins. Trent's gaze flicked toward Victoria briefly. "And you never understood that unpredictability destroys people." The tension between them thickened instantly. Years of unfinished history compressed into a single glance. Janice looked between them, chest tightening. "How long?" she whispered suddenly. Neither answered immediately. Janice's voice cracked harder this time. "How long was I being watched before Trent approached me?" Silence. Then Trent answered calmly. 11 months. The number hit her like physical impact. Janice stared at him, unable to process it. You monitored me for almost a year. I observed behavioral patterns, Trent corrected softly. Victoria muttered under her breath. God! Janice backed away from both of them. You researched me. Yes. You tracked me. Yes. You manipulated meeting me. Trent hesitated slightly. Then, yes. The honesty shattered her. Not because it was cruel, because it was calm, clinical. Like truth was simply more efficient now. Tears filled Janice's eyes instantly. Why, she whispered. And for the first time all night, Trent's expression almost looked vulnerable. You felt stable, he said quietly. Janice stared at him. He continued carefully. You were emotionally resilient but deeply loyal. You responded positively to consistency. Your attachment profile suggested long-term compatibility. Victoria closed her eyes briefly in disgust. But Janice barely heard her, because Trent kept speaking in the same calm tone someone might use to explain architecture, not love, selection, optimization. I loved you, Janice whispered brokenly. Trent stepped slightly closer, and I loved you. Janice shook her head violently. No, no, you loved controlling me. Something flickered across Trent's face. Pain. Actual pain. You think control and love are separate things, he said quietly. Victoria immediately snapped. They are. But Trent kept looking only at Janice. If you truly love someone, he continued softly, you protect them from instability, from unpredictability, from harm. Janice's voice trembled. By monitoring them, by understanding them, by owning them. That word finally landed. Trent's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. I never owned you. Victoria laughed sharply. That's exactly what you think love is. The corridor lights flickered again overhead. Somewhere nearby, security doors locked automatically with a metallic clang. Janice flinched. Trent noticed instantly. See, he said gently. You're frightened. Your nervous system is overloaded. Let me help regulate this. Regulate. Not comfort, not support. Regulate. Janice suddenly realized something horrifying. Trent talked about emotions the way corporations talked about risk management. Everything was systems language, containment language, control language. Victoria saw realization spreading across Janice's face and quietly said, he can imitate empathy perfectly, but he experiences vulnerability as system failure. Trent finally looked directly at Victoria again. You always reduce everything to pathology, and you reduce people to structures, Victoria shot back. Silence cracked sharply between them. Janice's breathing became uneven again. How did you escape? She asked Victoria quietly. Victoria's face hardened instantly. I disappeared before he could redesign the narrative. Trent's voice stayed calm. You vanished because you were deteriorating psychologically. Victoria stepped forward. No. I vanished because I realized you would never stop. The corridor suddenly felt colder. Trent looked back at Janice carefully. She's still manipulating perception, he said softly. That's what she's always done. Victoria laughed bitterly. At least I admit what I am. That line landed hard. Janice looked at Victoria sharply. You really did help build this. Victoria held her gaze. Yes, the honesty hurt, but it also felt more real than anything else tonight. Victoria continued quietly. I spent years helping companies predict human behavior, emotional dependency metrics, attachment reinforcement models. Janice's stomach twisted, and then Trent applied them to real relationships. Silence. Trent's voice lowered slightly. You say that like emotional understanding is abuse. Victoria snapped back immediately. No. Turning people into managed environments is abuse. Janice suddenly couldn't stand hearing either of them anymore. "Stop," she whispered. Neither moved. "Stop!" Her voice echoed violently through the corridor. Finally, silence. Janice's chest rose unevenly as tears slid down her face. "I don't even know what's real anymore." And for the first time, Trent looked genuinely affected by her pain. He took a slow step forward. "Janice," he said softly, "that's exactly why you should come back with me." Victoria immediately grabbed Janice's arm. "No." Trent's expression darkened slightly. "Not anger. Resistance to interruption. You're destabilizing her further," he said coldly. Victoria laughed in disbelief. "Listen to yourself." But Trent ignored her, still focused entirely on Janice. "You don't belong inside fear," he said quietly. "Come home. Let me fix this." Fix. The word echoed painfully inside her, because that was how he saw her now, not hurt, not betrayed, malfunctioning. Janice slowly pulled her arm free from Victoria's grip, then looked directly at Trent and asked the one question neither of them expected. "If I had never fit your profile," she whispered, "would you have ever loved me at all?" For the first time since this nightmare began, Trent had no immediate answer, and in that silence, Janice finally understood something devastating. Whatever Trent felt for her, it had always started with selection first, not love. The silence after Janice's question felt endless. "If I had never fit your profile, would you have ever loved me at all?" Trent stood motionless beneath the corridor lights, staring at her with an expression Janice had never seen before. Not calm, not controlled, certain. It lasted only a second. But it was real. And somehow that hurt more than all the manipulation, because for the first time, Janice realized Trent genuinely didn't know how to separate love from selection. He finally answered quietly, "I don't know." The honesty sliced through her. Victoria closed her eyes briefly beside her, like even she hadn't expected him to admit that much. Janice felt tears burn down her cheeks immediately. Not dramatic tears, exhausted ones, the kind that came when something inside you finally stopped trying to defend itself. Trent took a slow step toward her. "But what I felt became real," he said softly. Janice shook her head. "After you engineered it." His jaw tightened slightly. "I created conditions for stability. You created conditions for dependency." Trent's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "You think those are different things," Victoria muttered bitterly. "There it is again." But Janice barely heard her, because suddenly she could see the entire architecture of her marriage at once. The carefully timed affection, the emotional predictability, the subtle isolation from friends. The way Trent always positioned himself as the interpreter of reality whenever she felt uncertain, none of it was random. It was structure, and the most horrifying part, it had worked. Janice wrapped her arms tightly around herself. "I trusted you." For the first time, Trent actually looked hurt. "You still can." That sentence almost destroyed her, because he meant it, even now, even after everything. He still believed trust should return to him naturally because he believed he was the safest system available. Victoria stepped between them again. "She's not coming back with you." Trent's eyes flicked toward Victoria, colder this time. "This doesn't involve you anymore." Victoria laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You built your entire life around making sure it always involved me." The tension between them shifted instantly. Deeper now, older. Janice noticed it immediately. There were still emotions here neither of them fully escaped. Resentment, attachment, history. "You still think about her," Janice whispered suddenly. Trent looked at her, then answered honestly, "Yes." Victoria looked away immediately. That silence said enough. Janice felt another crack spread through her chest. Not jealousy, something stranger, like she was finally seeing the emotional machinery underneath everything. "You replaced her with me," Janice said quietly. "No," Trent replied immediately. Victoria scoffed softly, but Trent kept looking only at Janice. "You were never a replacement," he said. "You were—" Correction. The word landed like a physical blow. Janice stared at him in disbelief. "Correction?" Trent exhaled slowly, as if searching for language precise enough to explain something that made perfect sense to him. "Victoria and I became volatile," he said carefully. "Emotionally unpredictable. Destructive patterns formed." Victoria snapped back instantly, "Because you treated intimacy like behavioral management." But Trent ignored her again. "With you," he continued softly, "things aligned more naturally." Janice almost laughed through her tears. "You're describing me like a software update." That finally made something crack visibly across Trent's composure. Not anger, pain. "You think I didn't love you because I understood you deeply." "No," Janice whispered. "I think you loved the version of me that never threatened your control." Silence. Heavy. Sharp. Trent didn't answer immediately. That silence was answer enough. The corridor lights flickered again overhead. Victoria checked her phone quickly, tension returning to her posture. "We need to move," she said quietly. Trent's gaze shifted toward her. "There's nowhere in this building you can take her that I can't access." Victoria smirked faintly. "You always did confuse access with intimacy." Something dangerous flickered behind Trent's eyes. Not rage. Loss of control. Tiny, but visible now. Janice saw it immediately, and suddenly she understood something important. Trent was calm when systems behaved predictably, but unpredictability unsettled him deeply. Victoria noticed it too, which meant she probably knew exactly how to weaponize it. Janice, Victoria said carefully, without taking her eyes off Trent, "You need to decide something right now." Janice swallowed hard. "What?" Victoria's voice lowered. "Do you still believe his version of you is safer than your own?" The question hit brutally hard, because that was the real trap. Not surveillance, not manipulation, dependence. Trent had spent years teaching her to distrust her own uncertainty and rely on his certainty instead. Janice looked at him, and part of her still wanted to run back into that certainty. That terrified her most of all. Trent noticed hesitation in her expression instantly. His voice softened again. "Janice," he said quietly, "you are exhausted, frightened, emotionally overwhelmed. None of this is your fault." The words almost sounded comforting. Almost. But now she heard the hidden structure beneath them. Fragile. Overwhelmed. Unstable. He was still positioning her beneath his interpretation. Still trying to become the framework through which she understood herself. Victoria stepped closer to Janice. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "He doesn't need you weak. He just needs you doubting yourself more than you doubt him." Janice's breath caught, because that was exactly what had been happening for years. Every time she questioned something, Trent reframed it, softly, lovingly, reasonably, until her instincts always felt slightly less trustworthy than his explanations. And suddenly her phone buzzed violently again. Unknown number. All three of them froze. Janice looked down slowly. "One message, no sender. External transfer initiated. Read financial breach detected." Victoria's expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. Trent immediately pulled out his own phone. For the first time since this nightmare began, his composure cracked. Just slightly, but enough. Janice saw his eyes scanning rapidly across the screen. "What happened?" Victoria asked sharply. Trent didn't answer immediately. That alone was terrifying, because silence from Trent meant disruption. Finally, he looked up, and Janice realized something impossible. He looked unsettled. "Who else did you involve?" he asked Victoria quietly. Victoria frowned. "What? Someone accessed the behavioral archives." Victoria's face paled slightly. "That's impossible." Trent's voice lowered dangerously. "No, it isn't." Janice's pulse quickened instantly, because for the first time something existed outside Trent's control. And he hated it. Security alarms suddenly pulsed faintly somewhere above them, low, mechanical. The building shifted into emergency protocol lighting. Red warning lights flooded the corridor. Victoria whispered under her breath, "Oh no." Janice looked between them. "What's happening?" Neither answered immediately. That terrified her more than anything, because both of them looked genuinely uncertain now. Then Trent said quietly, "Someone just opened the entire system." The corridor fell silent again, but this time, it no longer felt like Trent owned the silence. And for the first time since Janice answered that phone call, something bigger than all three of them had entered the game. Red emergency lights pulsed across the corridor walls, washing everything in a slow mechanical glow. For the first time since Janice had known him, Trent looked genuinely destabilized, not emotional, not panicked, but disrupted. And somehow that was even more frightening. "What does that mean?" Janice asked again. "What system?" Trent's jaw tightened as he stared at the alerts flooding his phone screen. Victoria stepped closer beside Janice, equally tense now. The archives were isolated. Nobody outside the internal network should even know they exist. Trent looked at Victoria sharply. "Unless someone inside leaked them." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You think this was me? You vanished with copied files. You built the damn system." The tension between them snapped tighter instantly. Janice looked back and forth between them, overwhelmed. "What archives?" she demanded. "What exactly are you talking about?" Neither answered immediately. That silence finally broke something inside her. "Stop treating me like I'm standing outside my own life." Her voice echoed violently through the corridor. Both of them went still. Janice's chest heaved unevenly as years of swallowed confusion finally surfaced all at once. "You tracked me, profiled me, built psychological files on me, and both of you keep talking around it like I'm too fragile to hear the truth." Victoria looked away briefly. Trent stayed focused on her. Finally, he spoke. "The behavioral archives contain predictive models." Janice laughed bitterly. Predictive models for what? Trent hesitated. That hesitation terrified her more than any answer. For emotional influence, he admitted quietly. The words landed like ice water. Janice stared at him in disbelief. Victoria crossed her arms tightly. "Say the whole thing." Trent's expression darkened slightly. Victoria's voice hardened. "Tell her what Reed Financial actually became." A long silence stretched. Then Trent exhaled slowly. "We developed emotional stabilization systems for high-level executive environments." Janice blinked. "That means nothing," Victoria answered instead. "It means corporations paid millions to predict human behavior." Janice looked at her sharply. Victoria continued quietly. "Employee loyalty, relationship dependency, conflict compliance, emotional leverage." Janice felt physically sick. "No." Trent spoke carefully. The original intention was protective. Victoria laughed sharply. "You always hide behind intention." Trent ignored her. "In high-risk corporate environments," he continued, "unpredictability creates instability. We built systems that helped people maintain emotional equilibrium. Janice whispered, horrified. By manipulating them, Trent's eyes locked onto hers. By understanding them. No, Victoria snapped. By conditioning them. Silence cracked through the corridor again. Janice suddenly understood why Trent talked the way he did, why every emotional conversation sounded clinical, why he framed love as regulation and fear as instability. He had spent years turning human attachment into data architecture, and then brought that architecture home. Her knees weakened slightly. Victoria noticed immediately and steadied her gently. Janice almost pulled away automatically, then realized something strange. Victoria's touch felt uncertain, human, not calculated. That difference hurt more than she expected. Trent's phone buzzed again violently. He checked it instantly. His face shifted darker. Victoria noticed. What now? Trent looked up slowly. The breach isn't internal anymore. A chill spread through Janice's chest. What does that mean? Trent hesitated. Then someone released the files externally. Silence. Victoria went pale instantly. No. Janice looked between them, released to who neither answered fast enough. Then Trent said quietly, media, regulatory boards, federal investigators. The corridor suddenly felt too small to contain the weight of those words. Victoria swore softly under her breath. Janice's pulse raced. Everything is public now. Not everything, Trent replied immediately. Victoria looked at him sharply. You don't know that. Another alert flashed across his phone. Trent's composure tightened visibly. Janice saw it instantly. He was losing control faster now, and he hated every second of it. For years, he had managed perception, contained narratives, predicted outcomes. Now uncertainty was entering the system from outside, and uncertainty terrified him. The realization changed something inside Janice. For the first time since all this began, she wasn't the most destabilized person in the corridor anymore. Trent looked directly at her. We need to leave this building. Victoria scoffed. Suddenly you care about safety. Trent ignored her completely. Janice, he said calmly, if those files are exposed publicly, you are at risk too. Janice frowned. Why? Another hesitation. Then Victoria answered quietly before Trent could. Because your name is inside the archive structure. Janice felt cold all over. What Victoria looked genuinely guilty now. You weren't just profiled emotionally. Your identity was integrated into financial shielding structures. Janice stared at her. Explain that in normal English. Victoria swallowed hard. If Reed Financial collapses, legal liability may partially route through you. The words didn't process immediately. Then suddenly, oh my God. Trent spoke quickly. You were never intended to be harmed. Janice looked at him in disbelief. You attached me to this? It protected the structure. The structure. Her voice broke violently through the corridor. You tied me to corporate crimes without my knowledge. Trent stepped closer instinctively. Janice, listen to me. No. For the first time, she saw something dangerous flicker in his expression. Not anger, desperation. Real desperation. Because now the system wasn't just emotionally unstable, it was collapsing externally. Security alarms pulsed louder overhead. Somewhere above them, distant elevator doors slammed repeatedly as emergency lockdown protocols activated. Victoria checked her phone again, then froze. Janice noticed instantly. What? Victoria looked up slowly. There are reporters outside already. Trent closed his eyes briefly. That tiny reaction told Janice everything. This was real. Not paranoia, not emotional confusion. The world outside was finally seeing pieces of what she had been trapped inside. Trent looked directly at Janice again. "You need to come with me now." Janice almost laughed from disbelief. "You still think I trust you?" His voice lowered urgently. "This is bigger than us now." Victoria stepped between them immediately. "No, she's not going anywhere alone with you." Trent's patience finally cracked. Only slightly, but enough. "You are the reason this escalated." Victoria stared back coldly. "No, your need for control is." The tension between them became electric. Janice suddenly realized something terrifying. Neither of them fully knew who triggered the leak, which meant someone else had entered the story. Someone with access. Someone dangerous enough to expose everything. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. All three froze instantly. Janice looked down slowly. One message. "He's not the only architect." A second message appeared immediately after. "Ask Victoria who helped build the first behavioral prototype." Janice looked up sharply. Victoria's face had gone completely white. Trent noticed immediately, and for the first time all night he looked shocked too. Janice's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Victoria." Victoria backed away slightly. "Janice." Who else was involved? Victoria didn't answer. That silence was answer enough. Then the corridor lights suddenly went black. Total darkness swallowed them. And somewhere inside the building, a door opened. Darkness swallowed the corridor completely. For one terrifying second, nobody moved. Then emergency backup lights flickered on dimly deep red and unstable, painting the concrete hallway in pulses that made everything look unreal. Janice's breathing turned sharp instantly. Somewhere nearby, a heavy security door groaned open. Metal against metal, slow, deliberate. Trent immediately stepped forward, instincts taking over before thought. "Stay behind me." Janice stared at him in disbelief. Even now, even after everything, part of him still moved automatically into protector mode. Victoria grabbed Janice's wrist first. "No, don't let him isolate you again." The tension snapped tighter. Then footsteps echoed through the corridor. Not hurried, not security, one person, approaching slowly through the red emergency glow. Janice's pulse thundered in her ears as a figure finally emerged from the shadows at the far end of the hallway. Male, mid-50s, silver hair, dark overcoat, calm posture, and the second Victoria saw him, all color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. Trent's expression changed instantly too. Not fear. Recognition mixed with fury. The man stopped several feet away, studying the three of them like he was observing a completed equation. "Well," he said quietly, "this became emotional faster than expected." Janice looked between them. "Who is that?" Nobody answered immediately. The man smiled faintly. "That," he said calmly, "is probably why this entire system finally collapsed." Victoria's voice came out strained. "Elias, Elias." The name landed heavily. Janice looked sharply at Victoria. "You know him." Elias nodded before Victoria could answer. "We worked together," he said. Trent's jaw tightened violently. "You disappeared." Elias looked almost amused. "So did Victoria. You survived that." The hostility between them felt old, deep, dangerous. Janice's stomach twisted. "Who are you?" Elias finally looked directly at her. "Elias Mercer," he said calmly, "original architect of the behavioral adaptation model." Silence. Janice felt cold spread through her entire body. Original architect. Not Trent, not Victoria. Him. Victoria closed her eyes briefly like she already knew what was coming. Trent stepped forward slightly. You released the archives. Elias tilted his head faintly. Of course I did. Janice stared at him in disbelief. You exposed everything. Elias's gaze shifted toward her with unsettling calmness. No, he corrected gently. I liberated it. Victoria snapped instantly. People are going to get destroyed. Elias looked at her sharply. People were already destroyed. That silence hit hard because nobody could deny it. Janice looked between all of them, overwhelmed by the realization that her marriage had been built inside something far larger than she ever imagined. Not just one manipulative man, an entire ideology, a system. Elias studied Janice carefully. You're the replacement partner, he said almost analytically. Janice flinched. Trent immediately stepped closer to her instinctively. Don't talk about her like that. Elias laughed softly. That's fascinating, he murmured. You actually became emotionally attached this time. Victoria looked sick hearing that. Janice's voice shook. This time, Elias looked at Trent calmly. You were always too emotionally dependent on the stabilization subjects. Janice stared at Trent. Subjects. Not wives, not partners. Subjects. Trent's voice turned colder than she had ever heard before. You don't get to speak about her. Elias raised an eyebrow slightly. Interesting. You sound almost human tonight. That line snapped something loose inside Trent. For the first time, real anger cracked through his composure. Enough. The word echoed sharply through the corridor. Janice stared at him. She had never seen him lose control before. Not once. Elias noticed too, and smiled faintly. There you are. Victoria immediately stepped between them. Stop provoking him. Elias ignored her. You always thought the system was about emotional prediction, he said calmly to Trent. But it was never prediction. Silence. It was dependency manufacturing. Janice felt physically ill. Trent's voice lowered dangerously. You manipulated the models. Elias smiled faintly again. No, I perfected them. Victoria shook her head slowly, horrified. You used real relationships as behavioral experiments. Elias looked genuinely confused by her outrage. Every relationship is behavioral conditioning, he replied calmly. We simply quantified it. Janice suddenly understood something terrifying. These people had spent years turning love into engineering, attachment into architecture, pain into measurable response patterns. And somewhere inside all of it, she had become data. Elias looked at her again carefully. You destabilized faster than expected, he observed. Trent immediately snapped. Stop talking about her like a case study. The silence afterward felt enormous. Because Janice heard it too, the protectiveness, real, messy, emotional. And for the first time, Trent looked less like an architect and more like a man unraveling. Elias noticed it too. That's why the system failed, he said quietly. You crossed the line from management into attachment. Victoria stared at Trent, then finally whispered, Oh my God. Janice looked between them. What Victoria's face had gone pale. He wasn't supposed to emotionally bond with subjects. The word stabbed through Janice again. Subjects. Trent looked at Victoria sharply. Don't. But Victoria kept staring at him. That's why you became obsessive, she whispered. You broke your own conditioning model. Elias nodded calmly. Emotional contamination. Janice suddenly felt like the walls were closing in. Nothing about this felt human anymore. And yet, the pain in Trent's eyes did. That was the cruelest part. He wasn't pretending now. He genuinely looked devastated. Janice's voice trembled. Did you ever love me? This time, Trent answered immediately. Yes, no hesitation, No calculation, just raw certainty. Tears filled Janice's eyes instantly. Then why did you treat me like something to control? Trent's composure cracked completely for the first time. Because losing control meant losing you. Silence. Heavy. Devastating. Victoria looked away sharply. Elias watched all of them with detached fascination, and Janice suddenly realized something horrifying. Trent had spent years trying to engineer certainty because emotionally he was terrified of abandonment, not excuse, not innocence, but truth. The realization shattered something inside her all over again. Trent stepped toward her slowly. "Janice!" But before he could continue, alarms exploded violently throughout the building. Not internal alarms, external. Police sirens echoed from the streets below, then another sound. Helicopters. Media. The world outside had arrived. Elias checked his phone calmly. Federal investigators entered Reed Financial 12 minutes ago. Victoria swore under her breath. Trent closed his eyes briefly. Janice stared at him. For the first time since she met him, he looked powerless, not calm, not composed, just tired, human. And suddenly that hurt more than fearing him ever did. Security doors unlocked automatically throughout the corridor with loud metallic clicks. Emergency systems disengaging, the building opening, exposure everywhere. Elias stepped backward slowly toward the hallway exit. "This story belongs to the public now," he said calmly. Victoria glared at him. "You destroyed lives." Elias looked at her evenly. "No," he replied. "I exposed the machine." Then he disappeared into the shadows of the corridor. Gone. Just like that. Silence settled again. Only sirens remained in the distance. Janice looked at Trent, really looked at him, and finally understood the truth she had been avoiding. He was dangerous, manipulative, controlling, but he was also broken in ways no system could fully explain anymore. And loving someone broken did not mean staying where they could break you too. Tears slid silently down her face. Trent stepped closer carefully, like he already knew what was coming. "Janice." Her voice trembled as she interrupted him. "I can't be your system anymore." The pain that crossed his face this time was unmistakably real. And for the first time, Trent had no framework left to stop her from leaving. The sirens outside grew louder. Blue and red lights flickered through the narrow corridor windows, washing over Trent's face in fractured colors. Somewhere below the building, reporters shouted over one another while police vehicles flooded the street. The world had finally caught up to the truth. And yet, standing there in the pulsing emergency light, Janice realized the loudest thing in the room was still silence. Trent didn't try to stop her. That was what hurt the most. Not because she wanted him to, but because for the first time he seemed to understand that he couldn't engineer his way out of losing her. Janice stood trembling in front of him, tears drying against her skin, exhaustion settling deep into her bones. Victoria remained several feet away, watching both of them carefully, like she had already lived through this ending once before. Trent looked at Janice for a very long time, then finally asked quietly, "What happens to you now?" The question surprised her, because it wasn't about him, not entirely. For the first time since she met him, his voice sounded uncertain without trying to hide it. Janice swallowed hard. "I don't know," she admitted, and strangely, that honesty felt freer than certainty ever had. Below them, another wave of sirens echoed through the city. Trent glanced toward the corridor window briefly. "They'll arrest me," he said calmly. Victoria crossed her arms. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised," Trent replied quietly. "I'm calculating outcome." Janice almost smiled sadly through her exhaustion, even now, still translating pain into systems language. But something in him had changed too. The calm perfection was gone. Now she could see the man underneath the architecture, a man terrified of losing control because somewhere deep inside him, control had become the only thing standing between him and emotional collapse. That realization didn't erase the damage. It didn't excuse the manipulation, but it made him human again. And somehow that was harder to hate. Security officers flooded the lower floors moments later. Voices echoed through stairwells, commands, movement. The building was no longer sealed. The machine had finally broken open. Victoria stepped toward Janice quietly. "We should go." Janice nodded slowly, but Trent's voice stopped her. "Janice?" She turned back one last time. His expression looked unbearably tired now. Not dangerous, not calculated, just empty in a way she had never seen before. And suddenly she realized something devastating. People like Trent spent so much time trying to control love because they never learned how to survive vulnerability without it. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. Janice's eyes filled again instantly. "I know." That was the tragedy. She believed him, not because he was innocent, but because intention and damage were not the same thing. Trent stepped slightly closer. "But I did," he whispered. Silence settled heavily between them. Then Janice said the one thing she never thought she would. "I spent so long trying to become someone who made you feel safe enough not to control me." Trent closed his eyes briefly. Janice continued, voice trembling. "But love shouldn't feel like earning freedom." The words hit him visibly. Victoria looked away. Even she seemed affected by the truth of it. Another wave of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Federal agents. Closer now. Trent opened his eyes again slowly. "You should leave before they get here," he said quietly. Janice stared at him. No manipulation, no redirection, no attempt to convince her she was unstable, just acceptance. And somehow that acceptance hurt more than every lie before it. Victoria touched Janice's arm gently. "Come on." Janice nodded, then looked back at Trent one final time. For a second, memories flooded her all at once. The first dinner they shared, the nights he stayed awake when she couldn't sleep, the way he remembered tiny things nobody else noticed, the way she once believed being deeply understood meant being deeply loved. Maybe part of it had been love, but love without freedom eventually becomes fear. And Janice finally understood that loving someone broken did not require breaking beside them. "I hope someday," she whispered softly, "you learn how to love someone without needing to manage them." The pain in Trent's eyes became almost unbearable then, but he nodded once, small, defeated, real. Janice turned away before she could lose the strength to leave, and this time, Trent let her go. 3 months later, the city had moved on publicly the way cities always do. Headlines faded, news cycles shifted. Reed Financial collapsed under federal investigation. Behavioral manipulation programs, illegal surveillance systems, identity-linked financial shielding. Everything became public eventually. Executives disappeared into courtrooms and investigations. Elias Mercer vanished completely. Victoria Hale disappeared too. No goodbye, no final explanation, just gone again. Janice sometimes wondered if that was the only way Victoria knew how to survive anymore. As for Trent, he took a plea deal before trial. Janice never visited him, not because she hated him, but because healing required distance from the systems that once convinced her she needed permission to trust herself. Now she lived in a small apartment across the city. No penthouse, no luxury, no curated perfection. And for the first time in years, silence no longer felt monitored. Some mornings were still hard. Trauma didn't disappear just because truth became visible. Sometimes she still caught herself questioning her own instincts before making decisions. Sometimes she still heard Trent's voice in her head, reframing her emotions into instability. But healing, she learned, begins the moment you stop asking someone else to define your reality for you. One rainy evening, Janice sat alone beside her apartment window reading while soft jazz played quietly in the background. Peace. Simple. Unmanaged peace. Her phone buzzed softly beside her. Unknown number. Janice stared at it for a long moment before opening the message. Only one sentence appeared. Now you're finally free. No signature, no explanation. But Janice smiled faintly through tears anyway. Victoria. Slowly, Janice locked the screen and placed the phone face down. Then she looked out at the city lights beyond the rain-covered glass. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel watched. She felt alive. Sometimes the deepest betrayal is not being lied to. It's slowly being taught to distrust your own voice. Janice spent years believing love meant being understood so completely that someone could predict her emotions before she even spoke them. At first, it felt comforting, safe, like she had finally found someone who would never abandon her. But real love does not require surveillance to survive. Real love does not make you question your own reality every time you feel hurt. And real love never asks you to shrink yourself just to maintain someone else's sense of control. The hardest lesson Janice learned was this: kind people are often taught to confuse endurance with loyalty. They stay longer, forgive faster, doubt themselves first. They believe if they love hard enough, they can eventually soften someone who only knows how to control. But self-respect is not cruelty. Boundaries are not betrayal. And leaving something toxic does not mean you failed. It means you finally chose yourself. Healing did not happen all at once for Janice. Some wounds still echoed quietly inside her, but every day she trusted her instincts again. Every day she made choices without fear. Every day she reclaimed her own mind. She became freer. Not because someone saved her, but because she stopped abandoning herself. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of freedom there is. If this story touched you, tell me in the comments, have you ever ignored your instincts to keep a relationship alive? And what finally made you choose yourself? Don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories about betrayal, healing, self-worth, and finding strength after heartbreak.